The mop moved across the hospital floor in the same methodical pattern it had followed for 15 years. Night after night, Harold Doc Mitchell pushed his cart through empty corridors, invisible to the doctors and nurses who rushed past him like he was part of the furniture. They saw an aging janitor with tired eyes and worn scrubs, but they never looked close enough to notice the steady hands that never trembled, or the way he always positioned himself near emergency exits. When the gunshots echoed through the cardiac wing at 2:47 a.m., most of the staff froze in terror. But Doc didn't freeze. The sound triggered something deep in his memory, something he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. Because Harold Mitchell wasn't just a janitor. He was a former Army Special Forces medic who had saved lives in places that didn't exist on any map. And tonight, whether he wanted to or not, that part of him was about to wake up. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we continue with this powerful story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you believe stories about hidden heroes deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. St. Mary's General Hospital operated like a well-oiled machine, even during the graveyard shift. The third-floor cardiac wing hummed with the quiet efficiency of monitors, ventilators, and the soft footsteps of night nurses making their round. Dr. Sarah Chen had just finished checking on room 314 when she noticed him in the hallway, the same night janitor who'd been there since she started her residency 3 years ago. Harold Mitchell, 62 years old according to the employee roster, pushed his cart with the same deliberate pace every night. Gray hair, weathered face, faded blue coveralls that had seen better days. He never made eye contact, never initiated conversation beyond a polite nod when spoken to directly. The nursing staff called him Ghost because he seemed to appear and disappear without anyone noticing. "Evening, Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Chen said as she passed him in the hallway. He looked up briefly, offering a small smile. "Evening, Doc. Quiet night?" "So far," she replied, already moving toward the nurse's station. It was the same exchange they'd had countless times before. Polite, professional, forgettable. What Dr. Chen didn't notice was how Mitchell's eyes automatically swept the hallway as they spoke, cataloging exit routes and potential threats. She didn't see how his free hand instinctively checked the small medical kit he kept hidden in his cart beneath the cleaning supplies. And she certainly didn't know about the faded Army Special Forces tattoo hidden under his long sleeves, or the Purple Heart collecting dust in a shoebox at his one-bedroom apartment. Room 318 housed Marcus Williams, a 45-year-old construction worker recovering from emergency bypass surgery. His wife, Linda, had been keeping vigil by his bedside despite visiting hours ending 6 hours ago. The nurses had stopped trying to enforce the rules after seeing the worry etched deep in her face. "You should try to get some rest," Nurse Patricia Rodriguez suggested as she completed her midnight rounds. "He's stable. The surgery went perfectly." Linda Williams squeezed her husband's hand tighter. "I can't leave him. What if something happens?" Patricia checked the monitors one more time. "The cardiac unit is the safest place in the hospital. We have the best team and security patrols every hour. Nothing's going to happen." Down the hall, Harold Mitchell continued his methodical cleaning routine. He'd perfected this schedule over 15 years. Start with the supply closets, work through the patient rooms where families weren't present, then tackle the common areas. The cardiac wing was always his last stop because it required the most careful attention. Heart patients were fragile. One wrong chemical mixture or cleaning product could trigger reactions. He'd learned that lesson in Afghanistan, where improvised field hospitals demanded constant vigilance, where a moment's carelessness could mean the difference between life and death, where Sergeant Harold Doc Mitchell, 18th Medical Detachment, had earned a reputation for saving lives that other medics had given up on. But that was before the convoy hit the IED outside Kandahar, before he watched his team die while he lay trapped beneath an overturned Humvee, helpless to save them, before the nightmares and the guilt and the slow descent into a bottle that nearly killed him. The hospital job had saved his life in a different way. Quiet work, steady hours, no life or death decisions, just cleaning and routine and the comforting predictability of a world where the biggest emergency was usually a spilled coffee cup. At 2:47 a.m., that world shattered. The first gunshot came from the main entrance, echoing up through the hospital's concrete structure like thunder. Harold's hands stopped moving on the mop handle, his entire body going rigid with recognition. That wasn't a car backfiring or construction noise. That was a 9mm pistol fired in an enclosed space. The second shot confirmed it, then screaming from the lobby, followed by the distinctive crack of glass breaking. "Code Silver! Code Silver!" The PA system crackled to life. "Active shooter in the building. All personnel implement lockdown procedures immediately." In room 318, Linda Williams looked up from her husband's bedside with confusion turning to terror. Down the hall, Dr. Chen grabbed the emergency phone, her hands shaking as she tried to reach security. Nurse Rodriguez Rodriguez herded 2 other families into the break room, slamming the door and turning off the lights. Harold Mitchell stood frozen in the hallway, 15 years of carefully constructed peace crumbling around him. The smell of gun smoke drifted up from the lower floors, mixing with disinfectant and fear. His breathing became shallow, rapid. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright. The walls felt like they were closing in. Not again. Not here. But then he heard something that cut through the panic and pulled him back to the present. The sound of Mrs. Williams crying for help. Her husband's monitors were beeping frantically, his heart rate spiking from the stress and medication interaction. Harold's feet were moving before his mind caught up. The cleaning cart forgotten, he walked into room 318 where Linda Williams was pressing the call button repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. "Something's wrong," she sobbed. "His heart rate just shot up and the machine's making all these noises. Where are the nurses?" Harold looked at the monitors, processing the information with skills he thought he'd buried forever. Cardiac arrhythmia, blood pressure dropping, oxygen saturation declining. Mr. Williams was going into shock, probably triggered by the stress of the emergency and an interaction with his pain medication. "Ma'am, I need you to step back," Harold said quietly, moving to the bedside. His voice carried a calmness that seemed impossible given the chaos erupting throughout the hospital. "You're just the janitor," Linda protested. "Where's Dr. Chen? Where are the nurses?" "They're dealing with the emergency," Harold replied, already checking Mr. Williams' pulse and examining the IV lines. "Your husband is having a reaction. If we don't address it now, he could go into cardiac arrest." Something in his tone made Linda step back. There was authority there, competence, the voice of someone who'd done this before. Harold's hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting the IV flow, repositioning the patient to improve circulation, and manually calculating dosage adjustments that would stabilize the heart rhythm. His fingers found pressure points that would help regulate blood flow, techniques he'd learned in field hospitals where proper equipment wasn't always available. "What are you doing?" Linda whispered, watching this transformation with growing amazement. "Keeping him alive," Harold answered simply. As he worked, muscle memory took over. The sounds of chaos from the floors below faded into background noise. The fear and anxiety that had paralyzed him moments earlier were replaced by the focused calm of a combat medic doing what he was trained to do. Within 5 minutes, Mr. Williams's vitals began to stabilize. The erratic heart rhythm smoothed out. Blood pressure rose to acceptable levels, and his breathing became less labored. Harold continued monitoring, making minute adjustments to the IV and checking responses. "How did you know to do that?" Linda asked, staring at this man she'd seen mopping floors for weeks, but never really noticed. Before Harold could answer, the door burst open. Dr. Chen rushed in, her face pale with stress and confusion. "Mrs. Williams, we need to get you to a secure location. The shooter is on the 2nd floor," and she stopped mid-sentence, staring at Harold's position by the monitors. "What's happening here?" "Mr. Williams went into shock when the alarm started," Harold explained, stepping back from the bed. "Stress-induced arrhythmia, probably exacerbated by the pain medication. I stabilized him, but he'll need continued monitoring." Dr. Chen moved to the bedside, checking the monitors and examining the patient. Everything Harold had described was accurate. The interventions he'd performed were textbook perfect, the kind of field medicine that required years of training and experience. "How do you know how to do this?" she asked, looking at him with new eyes. Harold was saved from answering by another voice from the doorway. "Because he's Doc Mitchell, one of the best combat medics the Army ever produced." They turned to see Security Chief Robert Martinez standing in the entrance, his face grim but respectful. Martinez was a former Marine who'd done 3 tours in Iraq. Unlike the medical staff, he'd recognized Harold's background the day he was hired. "The shooter's been neutralized," Martinez continued, "but we've got wounded on the 2nd floor. The EMTs are tied up with a multi-car accident across town, and our ER doc is dealing with the shooter's victims in the lobby." He looked directly at Harold. "Doc, we need you." Harold's jaw tightened. He'd spent 15 years running from exactly this moment, this choice between the safety of anonymity and the duty that had once defined him. "I'm not licensed," he said quietly. "I'm not qualified anymore." "You just saved Mr. Williams' life," Dr. Chen interjected. "And if there are people downstairs who need help," she paused, studying his face. "What kind of training did you have?" Harold closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of 2 decades pressing down on him. 18th Medical Detachment Special Forces, Combat Medic, Afghanistan, 2 tours. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of Mr. Williams' stabilized heart monitor. Martinez stepped forward. 3 people on the 2nd floor. Gunshot wounds, possible internal bleeding. Hospitals in lockdown, emergency services are 20 minutes out minimum. You're the only one here with trauma experience. Harold looked at Linda Williams, who was clutching her husband's hand and staring at him with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. He looked at Dr. Chen, whose residency training hadn't prepared her for battlefield medicine. He looked at Martinez, a fellow veteran who understood the weight of choices made in crisis. Okay, Harold said finally, but I'll need supplies and someone who knows the hospital's inventory. Dr. Chen nodded immediately. I can get you anything you need. As they prepared to leave the room, Linda Williams called out, Mr. Mitchell. Doc, thank you for saving him. Harold paused at the doorway, looking back at the woman who just watched a janitor become something else entirely. Just doing my job, ma'am. The elevator ride to the second floor was silent, Harold's mind already shifting into the tactical mindset he'd thought was buried forever. Dr. Chen stood beside him, a bag of emergency medical supplies in her hands, studying this man she'd passed in hallways for 3 years without truly seeing. Why didn't you ever say anything? She asked as the elevator descended. About your background, your training. Harold stared at the floor numbers changing. Because I was done with that life. Done with making decisions about who lives and dies. Done with carrying other people's pain. But you just saved Mr. Williams. That was different. That was just maintaining stability. What we're about to do. He trailed off, the elevator doors opening to reveal the second floor chaos. The scene that greeted them was controlled pandemonium. 2 nurses were applying pressure bandages to a security guard who'd been shot in the shoulder. A maintenance worker sat against the wall, blood seeping through his shirt from a wound in his side. In the far corner, a young administrative assistant lay unconscious, her breathing shallow and labored. Dr. Chen moved toward the closest victim, but Harold's hand on her arm stopped her. Triage first, he said quietly. We assess everyone, prioritize by severity, then treat in order of who we can save versus who needs it most. It was a brutal calculus, the kind of decision-making that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. But it was also the difference between saving lives and losing them all. Harold moved through the scene with the systematic precision of a soldier, examining each victim quickly but thoroughly. The security guard had a through-and-through shoulder wound, painful but not life-threatening. The maintenance worker had internal bleeding that required immediate surgery. The administrative assistant had a head injury and was going into shock. The young woman first, he told Dr. Chen. Head trauma, possible brain bleed. We stabilize her, then the maintenance worker. The guard can wait. For the next 40 minutes, Harold Mitchell ceased being a janitor and became Sergeant Mitchell again. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd performed emergency surgery in bombed-out buildings under enemy fire. He talked Dr. Chen through procedures she'd only read about in textbooks, teaching her field techniques for dealing with trauma that no medical school covered. When the EMTs finally arrived, they found all 3 victims stabilized and ready for transport. The young woman's bleeding had been controlled. The maintenance worker's internal injuries had been addressed enough to get him to surgery, and the security guard was sitting up and talking. Nice work, the lead paramedic said to Dr. Chen as they prepared to move the patients. Textbook trauma response. Where'd you learn field medicine? Dr. Chen looked over at Harold, who was already stepping back into the shadows, letting the professionals take over. I had a good teacher. As the EMTs worked, Security Chief Martinez approached Harold. The police are going to want statements from everyone who was involved in the response. They'll want to know about your medical interventions. Harold nodded, understanding the implications. His actions tonight had saved lives, but they'd also blown his cover completely. There would be questions, paperwork, probably some legal issues around practicing medicine without a current license. It was worth it, he said simply. Martinez smiled grimly. Yeah, it was. For what it's worth, Doc, the hospital administrator wants to meet with you tomorrow. Word is they're looking at creating a position for someone with your skills. Crisis response coordinator, maybe trauma consultant. Harold considered this as they watched the last of the wounded being loaded onto gurneys. After 15 years of hiding from his past, the idea of embracing it again felt both terrifying and liberating. I'll think about it, he said finally. As the excitement died down and the hospital began returning to normal operation, Harold found himself back in room 318. Mr. Williams was sleeping peacefully, his vital signs stable. Linda Williams sat beside the bed, no longer crying, but watching her husband with quiet gratitude. They told me what you did downstairs, she said when she noticed Harold in the doorway. How many people you helped? Harold shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. Just did what needed doing. The nurses are calling you a hero. Dr. Chen said you saved at least 3 lives tonight. Heroes don't hide for 15 years, Harold replied quietly. Linda Williams studied his face, seeing something there that the medical staff had missed. Maybe they do. Maybe sometimes heroes need to heal too, before they can save others again. Harold didn't respond, but something in his expression softened. He checked Mr. Williams' monitors one more time, making a minor adjustment to the IV flow that would help him rest more comfortably. He's going to be fine, Harold said. Full recovery. You can go home and get some sleep. What about you? Are you going home? Harold looked around the room, then out at the hallway where he'd spent 15 years pushing a mop and trying to forget who he used to be. I think I might stick around a while longer, see if anyone needs help. As he walked back into the hallway, Harold noticed Dr. Chen 10 waiting by the nurse's station. She looked up when she saw him, and for the first time in years, someone in this hospital really saw him. "Doc," she said, using the name that finally fit. "Thank you for tonight, for teaching me, for being who you are." Harold nodded once, accepting the recognition he'd spent 15 years avoiding. "Thank you for trusting me." As the sun began to rise over St. Mary's General Hospital, Harold Mitchell made his way back to the supply closet where his cart waited. But this time, he didn't pick up the mop. Instead, he sat down in the small plastic chair where he'd eaten thousands of solitary lunches, and for the first time in 15 years, he allowed himself to remember the good he'd done instead of dwelling on the lives he couldn't save. The janitor was gone, Doc Mitchell was back, and St. Mary's General Hospital would never be the same.